What's going on, Badger fans? Welcome to another episode of Locked On Badgers. I've been excited for this one for a while. We have a great guest, somebody a lot of people are excited about joining the show today. So let's get started on Wisconsin, and let's go.
You are Locked On Badgers, your daily podcast on the Wisconsin Badgers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, Badger fans? Welcome to Locked On Badgers, your team every single day. I'm your host, Ryan Herrings, as always. Today's episode brought to you by Birddogs, birddogs.com/LockedOnCollege. And when you enter promo code LockedOnCollege, they'll throw in a free custom Birddogs Yeti-style tumbler with every order. And as I mentioned at the top, we're just going to get into this because people are here for Jon McNamara, not for Ryan Herrings today. Jon, thank you so much for jumping on the show. Obviously, a big fan of your work, and you've been doing this for a long time.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
I want to definitely give everyone an opportunity. Where can people find your work over at Rivals? Obviously, the site editor for the Badgers Rivals site, also a recruiting analyst. Where can people find what you're doing and kind of interact with what you have going on?
Yeah, obviously the website's the best place to be. You can join the Badger Den. It's a good community of people. And then I'm on Twitter way too often. I don't know how much I interact with people, but if you say something funny, I'll try to respond back to you.
Love it. I want to start here. So the Badgers coming off a big time recruiting weekend, picked up a couple commits. In this last group of 4 players, the 2 offensive linemen, Vernon Woodward, what's the biggest recruiting win for the Badgers in this last group of players?
I think it's Kevin Heywood, and it's probably not that close. If you look through his recruitment, Alabama was there, Georgia was there, the in-state school, Penn State was there, Notre Dame, Michigan, the list kind of goes on and on. So, really, really heavily recruited 4-star tackle. Going in, I thought this kid was going to take, all 4 of the officials he had scheduled and maybe even make another stop to Penn State because there's a lot of buzz about Penn State, for much of the spring. But for Wisconsin to get him on campus and close him out after one official visit is huge. Especially at a position where, was a little bit under the microscope this spring because they had lost some guys that were on top of their board. They lost Garrett Sexton, who had an offer from Wisconsin. He goes to Penn State. Mark Schroller ends up at UCLA, a guy that I thought they were in a good position with. Egan Boyer, who, visited in the spring, ends up at Penn State. So to bounce back at that position and get a 4-star tackle, Rivals 250 kid, I thought was huge. So, of the 4 who committed, and I like all 4, but it's Heywood, and it's not even close in terms of the recruiting victory that Wisconsin got when they landed him.
Well, and to your point, Nathan Roy as well, in-state kid, and didn't make his top 3. So offensive line was quickly becoming a point where, listen, fans were already getting worried about, is Jack Bicknell a recruiter? Is this a weak spot? So to see him bring in 2 offensive linemen is a big deal. Of this 4, what's the one player Badgers fans aren't talking about enough? Who's maybe the most underrated pickup out of this group?
Yeah, I might stay in the offensive line and say Ryan Cory. He kind of quietly accumulated 20, 25 offers. He had the Penn State offer, Miami, Stanford, a lot of schools kind of from coast to coast there. And, Wisconsin got him on campus in the spring and they offered during that visit. And, he had really positive things to say about the Badgers during that visit that not necessarily tipped his hand, but he was a kid that I kind of had my eye on, much more so than Kevin Heywood going in as a kid that could potentially pop this weekend. And he obviously did that. 6'4", 290 pounds. You look at the film and he's definitely going to be a guard for the Badgers. I like that fit there. A tough kid who finishes off blocks. And, like I said, Heywood might get a lot of the buzz and deservedly so, but I think Ryan Cory is going to be a real good player for the Badgers as well. So you're probably about 3/4 of the way done on that offensive line. They're looking for one final piece, and I think they could potentially get it this weekend.
Hey, let me ask you this, because this is something I talked about. I really like the Cory pickup because to me fits the mold of an interior offensive lineman a little bit more than did the Badgers in the previous staff maybe get a little too cute trying to just find, it felt like they were trying to fit tackles into the interior maybe a little too much.
Yeah, you don't like 6'7" tackles?
I don't know. I don't see him in the NFL that much.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I don't know that I've heard. You kind of look at what Wisconsin's done over the years, and they've had a history of kind of doing that. where, hey, we got 4 really good tackles, see if one can play guard. But yeah, Cory very much is, there's no way that kid plays tackle, right? I mean, he's an interior guy. Maybe he could play center for you, but yeah, maybe it's a little bit different approach by Bicknell, saying I'm recruiting guys. These guys will play tackle. These guys will play on the interior. I think a lot of that maybe has to do with Joe Rudolph. He was a guy who cross-trained a lot of these guys, so that you recruit maybe, hey, these are 4 great linemen, and we're just going to figure out where they fit in when they get on campus. This seems maybe a bit more intentional. I'd like to see a little bit more from Bicknell before I say anything's kind of set in stone. But yeah, I could see that. Like I said, Cory is very much to me a guard, and I don't know that he'll play anywhere else when he gets to Wisconsin. So it'll be something to track, for the remainder of this class and probably into 2025 as well. But I think that's an interesting point to follow.
Yeah, and it certainly wasn't anything against Rudolph either. Like, there is pros and cons on both sides. It just feels like it could become a little more intentional. But to your point, we'll have to track that. Continue with this current recruiting class, because I'm really interested, while I have you here, to be able to pick your brain on this. So we talked about this recent spat of commitments. Zooming out, who is the most underrated prospect, do you think, in this class right now, outside of maybe those 4?
Oof. I mean, there's a case to be made for a lot of guys. Kai and Barry Johnson has got a lot of pub, and he, I think, is a guy that Rivals is going to bump up to a 4-star, so he may not fit the bill as much as maybe, I don't know. You could make a case for a few guys, but Kai and Barry, in terms of offer sheet, and in terms of how much I know this coaching staff likes him, I'd go as far as to say he was their number 1 receiver on their board, and that stacks up against Amarion Stewart, and that's not a knock on Amarion Stewart. That goes to show you how much they like Kai and Barry Johnson, the fit that he is in their offense. So, he doesn't have the big-time offers that some of these other kids do, but Wisconsin loves this kid, and they were ecstatic when they were able to lock him up early. So, you can make a play for him. He kind of jumps to me. I know the staff loves Landon Gauthier as well. His recruitment really didn't take off. It was Wisconsin and with Stanford, and obviously there was a Stanford connection there with Bobby April and the guys from Wisconsin who knew him pretty well, and they tried to get him out there. So, in terms of sleeper guys, maybe those 2. Thomas Heiberger as well. I think he's a 4-star kid. I think when all said and done, he might get bumped up there as well. But there's a lot of kids I think you can like in this class. Those are just 3 at the kind of the top of my head there.
Oh, those are great answers, because I actually have a question from Badger Gator, who says, will Rivals continue praising KBJ while also not improving his ranking?
Yeah, that's a good question. Look, Clint Cosgrove loves him. And, I feel like I can evaluate guys okay. Clint is an absolute expert. You feel like you know what you're talking about, then you listen to Clint talk for a little while and you realize that you're not in the same ballpark as him. So if Clint says he loves a guy, and Clint has talked about Barry Johnson, he's never seen a kid having these type of ball skills. And Clint's seen a whole lot of kids play for a very long time. So, for Rivals, we have our ranking periods. So it's not where a guy just gets bumped up just kind of out of the blue. So the next period is coming up around the corner here. And again, I very much think that Barry Johnson is a guy that bumps up to 4 stars. I can't guarantee that, but that certainly seems to be trending that way. So I do think he's going to get that 4-star, before the start of his senior year.
Well, and that actually brings it to another question we had here. This is from T Badger. Just a general overview of how the rating system works for Rivals.
Yeah, good question. And like I said, we Rivals has these windows, or the evaluation windows, and we're actually going into one right now. They get a lot of feedback from the publishers, which is where I kind of come in. So I'll go in and say, hey, I saw this kid at a camp, or I was at a game on Fridays, and this is one of the kids that I saw. So I'll funnel a lot of my information to Clint, because he's our Midwest guy, and then those national analysts will take it to the table, and they'll kind of stack up and kind of see where kids fall, in terms of national prospects. So, I see a lot of in-state kids and maybe some kids from Illinois or kids from Minnesota, just because of, who I focus on. But it's interesting to hear the national guys talk about, okay, this is where this Wisconsin kid stacks up on a Midwest level, and here's where we think he stacks up on a national level. So, those guys have a completely different perspective of what local guys do, and it kind of all meshes together in the end. So, again, when Clint tells me about a guy, I usually listen and keep my mouth shut because he absolutely knows what he's talking about. I think he's as strong as we've ever had in this network in terms of being able to evaluate talent. So he's a guy that I would pinpoint as knowing what he talks about.
And he's somebody I've listened to as well. He's incredibly sharp. So you're dead on there. I do have another question with this year's class, and this is one that people have asked me, and I've reached out and asked some people. It seems like maybe Matt Toyer, the quarterback in this class, ideal frame, 6'4", 6'5", really good arm, can move, in a spot where a lot of eyeballs are on him. Is there something keeping him from kind of being that 4-star status? And this is where fans get into, well, if he was committed to ... he would be a 4-star. And I'm sure you hear that a lot. Where is he from being that 4-star quarterback? And then is there such a thing as the schools getting those rating bumps?
Yeah, the Wisconsin bump, which is like the anti-bump, I guess. Every fan base feels that way, I'm sure. And except maybe, I guess, if you're Alabama or Georgia, you might get the SEC bump the other way. I think it's something that fan bases all experience. People don't talk as much about when, hey, this is a 3-star kid and he's committed to Wisconsin and we just gave him a 4-star.
Right.
That doesn't get talked about as much as a kid who dropped. So, with the movement down, there's just as much as often as moving up the other way. And with Mabry, he's a kid that we haven't rated as a 4-star kid right now. So I guess it depends where you're looking. I can assure you that Phil Longo thinks he's one of the best quarterbacks in the country. He went after him at North Carolina. That didn't change, obviously, when he got to Wisconsin. So they feel very good about the quarterback that they have, regardless of how many stars are next to his name.
Oh, great stuff. And I apologize for that. I didn't realize that Rivals had him as a 4-star because that's where most of us think he should be. So that's awesome stuff. We're going to take a very quick break, come back with Jon McNamara with a bunch more stuff, but we do have to take a quick break for our friends of the show over at Birddogs. Birddogs is the #1 pair of pants that I wear. It's really what keeps me from looking homeless while staying comfortable. Birddogs makes me look good. My wife loves them. I have a couple pairs. I never take them off. And now if you go over to Birddogs, they have a great offer for you. With every order, you're going to get a free Yeti-style tumbler with every single purchase. That's birddogs.com/LockedOnCollege. And use the code LockedOnCollege for a free tumbler with every purchase, birddogs.com/LockedOnCollege. And again, I've told the story where I got confused as a homeless guy going out to get my breakfast because, my pants weren't, I didn't really look the part. Birddogs helps me avoid that confusion while still being comfortable. Go to birddogs.com/LockedOnCollege. I do want to take a quick second to say thank you to everybody who's going to watch the show. Really do appreciate it as we build this community up. And let's get right back into it with Jon McNamara because we're smarter because he's here, quite frankly. Jon, welcome back to the show again. I want to say thank you for being here with all the good guests. We run out of time before we run out of questions, but I do want to go here. This is another question we had from somebody listening to the show. Any insight on who would potentially be next? A commit that we're not really talking about that's a possibility.
Well, I think they're going to have more success from this weekend, and you can kind of, deduce the names down probably on your own. So I would just say, kind of keep your eyes open the next couple of days, or it might take a little bit longer than that. But I could say that the staff still feels pretty good about the uncommitted kids who are there. I don't think they'll close out on every single one of them, right? But I think there's at least 2 that I would keep a very close eye on, moving forward. I put a very early future cast in for Analu Lafale, or Lafayette. I hope I'm saying that right. I know his dad just calls him Lou, so that's when I text him. That's what I reach out to him as. But I think he's a kid that absolutely winds up at Wisconsin. He wants to commit. I don't know the day off the top of my head. It's in July though, July 7th or whatever it might be. So when that comes, whether he sticks to that date or bumps it up a little bit earlier, I think that's where he winds up at Wisconsin. I talked to Dominic Nichols today. feel good about Wisconsin in that one, but he wants to take his officials. Michigan's there, Kentucky's there as schools he will for sure see. He's also still talking about Georgia as a potential June 23rd date, and then Clemson is also there in July. I don't know if he makes it all the way to July. We'll have to see there, but he's a kid I heard really, really good stuff about while he was on campus, and then I think he got some encouragement from the people around him to take a look at some other places. And that's not like bad advice. I'm not insinuating that at all, but I really liked where Wisconsin sat with him after the visit. It'll be very interesting to see what Michigan can do in terms of moving the needle, and then Kentucky as well. So I don't think they're done with the guys who are on campus. I think we're just we're waiting for news to kind of trickle out here, but they're going to ramp things up again in just a couple hours here, a couple days when they get a whole new batch of official visitors. So there's a real good chance that the bulk of this class will be completed before the month of June is over.
And then what are you going to do?
Then what am I going to do?
No, I'm sure. No, there's no doubt. There's always stuff. I wanted to ask you about Lafayette. Yeah, sorry. I was going to ask you about Lafayette's game. Where do you think he projects in college? Because I've seen him as, some people think he's going to be more have his hand in the dirt. Maybe he's an outside linebacker to me, but where does he project to you?
Yeah, outside linebacker, and that's where they're pegging him at Wisconsin. But if you look at some of those pictures, he's a big kid. I'm not sure one of the ones I saw him standing next to someone, but he was standing next to someone who's a pretty big kid, and he was bigger than that dude. So, his message when he was on campus was, we want to pair you with Thomas Heiberger, and you two guys are going to be our outside linebackers in this class. Could he grow into a guy that plays with his hand in the ground? I don't see that. I see his max being that kind of TJ Bowlers, outside linebacker plus guy. But I think that they think he's a guy, he's bigger than Herbig, right? But I think they see him as a guy, hey, you go get the quarterback. We're going to put you on the field. You go get the quarterback type of guy. Whereas Heiberger, a little bit more versatile. He's a little bit longer. I think you do a little bit more, but Honoru's a guy I think that you just say, hey, go get the quarterback, and that's what we want you to do on the field. And I think he's going to have a lot of success. And like I said, I do think he winds up at Wisconsin, but that's not for sure yet.
Right. Here's a question here from Big Bucky. Communication with the football program, how's that changed with the new coaching staff? And then how big of an adjustment is that for the people who cover the program?
I guess I need to clarify communication. The media has been welcomed into more practices. As I say that, the media had actually very good access under Paul Chryst as well, I would say, in comparison to other schools across the country. But, for us to be able to watch all 15 spring practices, that's pretty unique. And that was great. I mean, it was great for our site and, everyone who covers the team, right? It creates a lot of content, and I think that's certainly intentional.
Mm-hmm.
There's guys working behind the scenes that understand that keeping a steady stream of coverage is a good thing for the football program. The way that they've staggered these commitments out is intentional. If you've been following, there's one just about every day. I thought they would stagger the two yesterday for having one this evening too as well, but it just worked out that the two Pennsylvania kids wanted to come in the same day, and obviously you're not going to tell them no. So there's a method to this, and I think they're very intentional in how they go about doing things. Look, we've been talking about this football program every single day since Luke Fickell's been hired, and a lot of it is because for good reason. Luke Fickell's here, and there's a lot to talk about, but they've also provided the opportunities for people to write and to talk and to go on podcasts and to continue to talk about this team. And in this day and age in college football, that's extremely, extremely important.
Well, and I wanted to. This question's from ehoff15, and he said, "John, have you seen a recruiting weekend this successful for the Badgers?" I wanted to expand on that and just have you seen a time that's been this exciting for the Badger football program since ... If you have.
I told someone yesterday that I can't see if I can get my days right. What was that? What was yesterday? Tuesday? Tuesday was one of the busiest days that I've had doing this, just in terms of, getting a story up on a kid who, 2025 running back right away in the morning, and then trying to piece together 2 commitments and then stuff in between. And just this week in total, which isn't over yet, has been a ton of prepping and getting stuff together because of the amount of success that they've had. I'd have to go back and look. Look, June is usually like you're locked and loaded and you're ready to go. It's start to finish going to be extremely busy recruiting wise. I can't think of a specific weekend that's churned out so much good news for that program in such a short amount of time, right? I mean, 4 commitments. You're still trying to piece together potentially a few more from that group. And just in terms of the number, 17 is a huge number, and I know that I think 6 were committed, but that's a huge group of official visitors. So they started with a bang, and next weekend doesn't have the numbers that weekend 1 does, but it could be just as productive for the Badgers. So again, sometimes when you talk about this group, when you talk about what they're doing, it comes off as a knock on like Paul Christ and that group. They had great Junes as well. I mean, so it's not to say look at what Luke Fickell's doing, we've never seen anything like it. It's not like that, because Paul Christ cleaned up really well in June as well. But in terms of the guys that they've got on campus, the star power that they've got on campus, and the success that they've had after one weekend, I tend to think that just off the top of my head, we haven't really seen something like this just yet.
Yeah, that's a great point that you had. It's hard almost to talk about how one staff is doing something without people taking it as an indirect shot to the other staff. There's different methods. And Paul Christ had 2 back-to-back incredible recruiting years that had Badger fans through the moon at the time, so
yeah.
To your point, it happened here, and then we all know what happened the couple years following that. But where does this class potentially finish up? And maybe a bigger picture question that's going to lead into another topic potentially. But how consistent can Luke Fickell become as a recruiter at Wisconsin? Is top 15 classes, top 20 classes? What should be a realistic goal here?
Yeah, I would start with let's have Wisconsin consistently finish in the top 25, and then let's re-examine, because look, this is a program that has never done that consistently. They've never been consistently in the top 30 or top 35, to be real honest with you. And obviously, the argument can be made that, those rankings don't matter because Wisconsin's had a lot of success. So yeah, that's true. But if you're talking about true just recruiting rankings, I think right now this class has a very good chance to finish in the top 25, but that's not guaranteed. So I guess that's where I would feel comfortable starting. Top 15. Look, that's some elite territory, because you're saying, hey, look, Alabama's always going to be there. Georgia will always be there. Ohio State will always be there. USC will always be there. Michigan will likely always be there. So like 10 of those spots you could say are pretty locked in. And then maybe you have like a crazy Ole Miss class where there's some guy in their NIL department saying, hey, look, I'm going to spend as much money as we want. I want a top 15 class this year, so do it. So I'm a little hesitant to say, yeah, they can do top 15 every year. I'd start with top 25 because I do think that's realistic.
Okay, and that's very fair. And I almost want to then ask, is there an element of recruits needing to see this on the field first? So we've had that discussion of maybe this year it's a little more difficult to sell that vision because they haven't seen it on the field with Luke Fickell and Phil Longo and Tressel in Madison. Is next year, if this year goes really well, is next year potentially a little easier to recruit to?
I could see a little bit of that, but Luke Fickell is very much selling, I've been in the college football playoff to today's kids, and I've had success at Cincinnati. And if you think what I did at Cincinnati was special, just wait till I get going at Wisconsin. So I think there might be a little bit of that, but hey, that's wait and see type of thing at Wisconsin. But this group, which a bulk of them were at Cincinnati, selling like, hey, we've done this and we know how to get to the playoffs, and now we have more resources in a better conference, and the list kind of goes on and on. So I mean, they're very much selling that. But again, yeah, obviously it's going to matter what they do on the field, and that always matters. But Luke Fickell is established, and he's saying, like, this is what I've done. I'm going to do better things at Wisconsin. So I think that is being emphasized much more in the ears of these recruits and the eyes of these recruits when they get them up on campus, because this guy is one of the few coaches out there right now who could say, I've been in a college football playoff game, and I know what that feels like, and I know how to get there.
Well, and certainly he was able to bring in an incredible class of transfers as well without having seen anything on the field. So that would play into your point. I want to shift gears here because we're going to run out of time before we run out of questions with a guy like Jon, but I do want to touch on Daniel Freitag for a second. And just from your perspective, how big of a win was this? I mean, it's certainly you bring in a 4-star point guard, but for how much did Greg Gard need this win particularly?
Yeah, it was big. It was huge for Greg Gard to get this kid. And, I was at the advanced camp 2021 when Daniel Freitag was there, and he picked up the offer, and you just kind of look at, okay, what does this program need to get over the hump or get to the next level? Well, AJ Storr, you couldn't have created a guy better than Storr to come in and be that athletic wing who can score, who can shoot, who can break up spells on offense where the Wisconsin just goes non-existent for 5-6 minutes at a time. And then, Freitag to me is another piece to that, an athletic point guard who can get to the rim, who can distribute. He can shoot it pretty well too. But he's a lot of, hey, what do they need to change up? Well, you get a guy like Freitag. Well, now they have a guy like Freitag. So I thought he was a huge gift for this staff. And look, they did everything right in his recruitment. They were there for 2 solid years, consistently there in his ear, with the coaches, getting him on campus. I think he took 6 basketball visits. So they did everything the right way there. Greg Gard, Joe Kramnoff played a huge role. Just looking at that top 5, Virginia was there, but they were kind of sprinkled in at one point. Baylor was there very early, but then they faded off. Minnesota, obviously being the in-state school, they were there. No school was even close in terms of the effort put forth from start to finish than Wisconsin was. So I mean, Greg Gard deserved to get this one, and he's going to be a good player for them. And you talk about I think it's a perfect situation, right? You come in, Chucky's there, you learn under Chucky for a year, then you take over the baton for him. So it's a good situation for Daniel. It's a great situation for Wisconsin, and it's a great recruiting win. One of the best that Gard's had since he's been the head coach.
Yeah, we did a topic on that actually. If it was the best win of Gard's career, and I think it was. I mean, you've known Winter. Ben Carlson was a big recruiting win at the time. Obviously, yeah, Johnny Davis, but I don't know. I think if you just look at not who's going to be the best player, but just from a recruiting battle standpoint, I think he might be.
Yeah, I mean, he's certainly in the conversation. Again, you look back to those schools, and all were legit, right? I mean, he didn't just make up a top 5. I mean, real early on, it was Baylor. Wisconsin offered right away, then Baylor was there. And then it was Wisconsin, Virginia kind of neck and neck. You're like, oh, there's another one. Bennett's going to come in and steal from Wisconsin. Then, they kind of fizzled off. And then Notre Dame gets involved. And during that whole thing, there's a football thing going on, right? So, give Gard a lot of praise for never wavering, trusting his early eval. And he out there before anyone else. Look, like I said, I was at that camp, and Daniel Freitag was not some household name at that time. Gard said, I see a good basketball player here, even though it just finished up his freshman year, I believe, at that time. They offered him, and they were rewarded in the end. So, it's a great win for them. Like I said, I think it's gonna be a real good basketball player for Wisconsin.
What do you think of this team next year? I know it's early, but the pieces are maybe one more comes in somewhere, but the pieces are mostly in place at this point. And almost particularly fans sometimes think that players will continue to always get better in college. That doesn't always happen on a linear basis. Sometimes guys don't develop as much as you think. There's a lot of pieces coming back. How good do you think this team can be next year now that you've added in an AJ Storr?
Yeah, well, he's the big piece there. I mean, I don't think there was a guy out there in the portal that fit what this team needed more than AJ Storr. I mean, there probably was, right? That's kind of hyperbole, but
there's 1,000.
You look at right, yeah, the portal is flooding with people. But look, I mean, this guy is exactly what you would think last year's team needed. Someone who is an athletic guy in the wing with some size, who can shoot, who can most probably importantly get to the rim, get to the free throw line, which Wisconsin sometimes was non-existent as well. So had you brought back this same team without Storr, I think it's a different conversation, right? I mean, that's not some insider breaking news there. But in terms of what they bring back, I mean, you could kind of talk yourself into either way, I suppose. You could say this is the same group that took us to the NIT and we don't feel great about them, or hey, Tyler Wall's going to be better next year because Tyler Wall will be healthy. Stephen Krull, another year in the weight program. He's going to be bigger, stronger type of thing. Chucky Hepburn, another year as a starter. And now you have Storr taking off some of that scoring load. You maybe, I think the most likely scenario, you have a guy like Max Klesmit come off the bench. And, you didn't have much of anything come off the bench next year. So Storr changes so many things because it allows you to do a lot of different things. It takes that scoring burden off of Chucky, a little bit off of Connor as well. So I think his addition is just so huge for what this team wants to do next year. And look, if things go the right way, I very much think that this is a team that could be contending for a Big Ten title next year, largely due to what I think Storr can provide to this roster.
That's some early hype. I love it. I do want to ask you this one because I've had this theory that one of the reasons Gard, and it's hard to pick up a backup five. I mean, that's been talked about a ton in the portal. People want to come in and play it. That's obvious. I also think Gus Yalden can play backup five next year. I'm curious where you're at on Yalden potentially being able to come in as a freshman and not be certainly you have an established guy, but for 5 to 10 minutes, considering where we were last year and considering how the type of high school competition Yalden played, I think he can be your backup five next year.
I think that's the most likely scenario, right? With a guy like Yalden, with a guy like even Nolan Winter, in the new age of college basketball, these kids aren't going to come in redshirt. You're not banking on, okay, what is Gus going to look like in a year? What is Nolan going to look like in a year? In the strength program and redshirting, these kids want to play right now, and I think both are going to be given the opportunity. I think Gus more so than Nolan because I think Gus is more of a true post player, even though I think obviously Nolan at 6'10" and he's like 220, 230 right now. I think he can give you some too. But yeah, how realistic that is, I don't know. It's tough to say without seeing Gus Yalden even in the college practice. But yeah, could he eat up 10 to 12 minutes a night? I think that's realistic, right? I mean, to come in and play defense and potentially rebound and score a little bit and not turn the ball over. Again, that is asking a lot from a freshman to come do that in the Big Ten, but I think it's absolutely something that this staff has probably penciled in. Do you want to have Gus do that, or do you want to try to find some 6-year guy who's been on 3 different teams, but he's, brings a little bit to the table? Like you talked about, Ryan, it's a tough sell to say, we want you to come in, you're not going to start, and we want you to come in and we want you to rebound, block shots, and play defense for 10 minutes a night.
Right.
If you like that role, then we got a good place for you. It's a tough sell when you bring back just all of your starters. When
you could go to a lower level school and play 35 minutes a game.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a tough sell. Couple more quick questions, then we'll get you out of here again. I would love to be able to do this again at some point. You're an unbelievably insightful guest. Someone asked, who's one Badgers football player, offense and defense, that we're not talking about enough going into the season, but by the end of this football year, we're going to say that dude had a big impact on the year?
Oof.
Putting you on the spot here. I didn't send him this previously, so I'm putting him on the spot.
Oh my goodness. Oh man, I feel like It's funny because kind of what we talked about. I feel like so many guys.
It could be so many. And just in the
on
receiver room
offense,
alone, it could be like 5 different guys.
right. Yeah. And, we've had 15 practices to watch these guys. So there's no one where you're like, oh, wow, we saw this kid on day 1 and then we only saw him again on day 12. We saw a pretty consistent run of practices. So going into the summer, since I've been covering this team at 15 plus years, this is probably the best idea of what you've had on the roster than you've ever had, just because of the access that you've had.
Right.
Reporters have sat through every single practice, and there's only so much that you can get from watching. Obviously, there's a ton more that goes on in terms of the film and what's being communicated to these guys on plays. You go on forever to talk about that, but in terms of having a good understanding of the roster, the media that were there, I think really have a great feel for it. So in terms of sleep, Jake Renfro is a guy. I'm sorry, not Jake Renfro. Joe Huber, I think, is a guy right now who's kind of teetering on that first line, second line. I think he's a guy that takes a big jump, and I think he starts for Wisconsin. He's gonna be a real good player for them. So maybe he fits the bill on offense. Defense. I don't know. It could be a lot of different guys. I know that they're looking for guys to step on the defensive line. Maybe it'd be a guy like Varner. Like I go back now, Varner's a guy that no one saw in the spring.
Mm-hmm.
So, maybe he could come in there and make an impact. Maybe a guy like James Thompson, who's another teetering first tier, second tier guy. Maybe he makes a big jump. So I think if there's a move to be made on this defense, it probably falls in the defensive line. So we'll see how that shakes out in the fall.
Who do you think leads the team in sacks this year?
Whew, man, you got some tough questions tonight.
Sorry, no, I asked the questions that we don't know. That's because it really could be this going to be a bit of a pass rush committee to some degree, and I kind of wonder if, to me, that's the biggest fly in the ointment of me being super optimistic for this year. Is I'm just not sure we're going to get to the quarterback, and I don't know who that guy is.
Yeah, Daryl Peterson might be the safest answer, just because I think he'll be putting opportunities to do that a lot. Is it Muma in the middle? Are they going to put him in positions where he's getting to the quarterback? Jake Chaney is kind of their guy there, where it's like third down, get Chaney on the field, because he's got some burst and some pop into him, and he's a guy that can get to the quarterback as well. Are they going to send Hunter Wohler on some stuff closer to the line of scrimmage? I think it could be a handful of guys. The safe pick, like I said, probably Peterson. I think he's got the best skill set for that. I don't think it's going to come from a defensive lineman with this group that they have returning. But it could be sprinkled in where there's not a whole lot separating the top 7 guys. Maybe 6 or 7 guys all have 5.5 sacks. Maybe the top guy has 8 and the lowest guy has 4.5. So it could be a very much by committee thing. In the spring you saw just a lot of different alignments, a lot of different ways that they like to group guys. So that's going to be very interesting to follow during fall camp to see what they're putting out there, in terms of different looks and different personnel. I think they're going to see more guys rotating through than you saw under Jim Leonard, specifically on the defensive side of the ball.
And just one last question, John. And again, we've already kept you for 10 minutes more than I said I would, so I really do appreciate it.
Yeah, no worries.
Covering the Badgers in your role for about 15 years, what's one recruit you can look back at and say, I really thought that guy would have a much better Badgers career, much more successful career? What's one recruit that really fooled you? And not a lot of times it's not the recruit's fault, right? Coaches, schemes, things change. I can already tell you, I thought Arrington Farrar was going to be a dynamic defender for us. And just didn't work out. Those things happen. It's not his fault. And I told you this before the show, I was all in on the Austin Kofensis train. So I'm curious if there was anybody that you can look back and say, yeah, I really was into that recruitment and it just didn't pan out for whatever reason.
Man. Well, I can tell you Kofensis' story. I was at a camp, like a summer camp, a long time ago, obviously, and it was Gary Anderson, Kofensis, and they put Kofensis out on the field. He was there with his dad, and he was thrown in the middle of the field, and I was like, man, because all you heard was this kid is setting Utah on fire. And, you know, you talk to his dad a bunch, and his dad's like, you know, he's got all these offers. He's got all this stuff going on. You know, all these schools want to visit, all this type of stuff. And you really felt at the time that, like, Gary Anderson, he's got these Utah ties. He's going to go out and get this best player from Utah. And honestly, I was like, I cannot believe how tiny this kid looks. He's thrown in the middle of Camp Randall. You know, the camp is going on, and I was like, maybe I'm wrong here. I don't know, but he looked like he was 5'7". And then, you know, he gets to Wisconsin, and you see him in the spring practices, and he just did not look the part, and he did not last long there. So that one was one that, like, you could very much get involved in the Austin Confence's hype, you know, because he, like, in high school football in Utah, he was the man. But he was not the man in college, at least not at the quarterback position. And Wisconsin wanted him to try something else, and he wanted to stick at quarterback. I think he went to 4 different places, and he just was not a college quarterback. But, you know, an elite high school player, absolutely. It just didn't work out at the college level for him.
No, and I think he ended up as a defensive back at his last stop.
Yeah, eventually he got there. I think he played some running back too. I mean, he made a few different stops. But yeah, that was an interesting recruitment to follow. Because, I mean, really at the time, the way things were being drummed up, you thought that Wisconsin was getting this dynamic quarterback that was this perfect fit for what Gary Anderson wanted to do. And
nope,
none of it was real.
No, it just did not come to pass. All right, John, thank you.
Anderson,
oh, I'm losing you for a second here. Oh, I think we lost John.
Wasn't real.
Oh, well, we're kind of running to the end of it anyway. John, thank you so much for coming in. For everyone that's listening to the show, thank you so much for it. I really do appreciate it. Would love to get John back on again. We had some technical difficulties at the end, but he's awesome. And please go check out his work over at Rivals. He does incredible stuff, and he's been doing it for a long, long time. So thank you for everybody tuning in on Wisconsin, and we'll talk to you guys tomorrow.